Welcome back to Historical American Girl Read Alouds. We are at the very end of Meet Josefina. We've finished the story, but now we're ready to read the section in the back that's called A Peek into the Past. Some of the books call it Looking Back, some call it A Peek into the Past. This one actually says both. And this is the part where it gives you some nonfiction true facts about the time period so you can understand more about Josefina's life. I'm going to be referring to my map here to start with. Today, New Mexico is one of the 50 states in the United States. But in 1824, when Josefina was a girl, New Mexico was part of the country of Mexico. For hundreds of years before that, all of Mexico, including New Mexico, belonged to Spain. In fact, Spain once ruled huge areas that are now part of the United States. Spanish colonists built many towns and cities that are still important today, such as Los Angeles and San Francisco, California, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and San Antonio, Texas. So here on our map, here is New Mexico, which was part of Mexico at the time, but ruled by Spain. And Spain isn't on this map at all because it's clear across the Atlantic Ocean over in Europe. So New Mexico was part of Mexico. Texas was part of Mexico. Arizona, California, a lot of this section, even up into Nevada and Utah, was part of Mexico at the time. And you can see that from the little map in the book. So the cities that it was talking about were Los Angeles and San Francisco, California. So there's San Francisco, California. There's Los Angeles, California. Santa Fe, New Mexico, we've already talked about. San Antonio, Texas is right here. So all of this section at that time belonged to Mexico. Spanish and Mexican settlers first came to New Mexico 400 years ago in 1598, even before pilgrims landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts. The settlers came to claim land of their own. They built their homes in the mountains and valleys along the Rio Grande, the biggest river in New Mexico. Many New Mexicans today are related to these early settlers. The small town of Santa Fe was the capital, but most settlers lived in villages and on ranchos. It was difficult to raise crops and animals on the dry, mountainous land. Drought was a constant worry, and so were sudden floods caused by heavy rainstorms. Summers were hot and winters were bitter cold. Lightning, grizzly bears, mountain lions, and rattlesnakes killed farm animals, and sometimes people. To survive, everyone, even children, worked hard. While men and boys worked in the fields or herded animals, women and girls cooked, gardened, and tended the home. At the bottom of the page there, it says, "This painting shows a kitchen scene from Josefina's time. One woman is grinding corn using stones called a mano and metate, like the ones shown below the painting. The woman next to her is using cornmeal to make tortillas." At the very top of the page, the picture there, it says, "Settlers carried their belongings to New Mexico in carts pulled by oxen. The wooden wheels squeaked so loudly they could be heard for miles." Children like Josefina knew their grandparents, aunts and uncles, and cousins very well. Usually all these relatives lived nearby. Sometimes they lived together in one large household. Orphans, widows, or Indian servants might become part of the family too. The settlers brought their language and customs with them to New Mexico. They spoke Spanish, kept their Catholic faith, and enjoyed music and dances from Spain and Mexico. They raised animals that were common in Spain, such as horses, mules, donkeys, oxen, sheep, and chickens. They grew crops that were familiar to them, such as wheat, onions, carrots, apples, and apricots. To water their fields, they built special ditches called acequias, much like the ones used in Spain. But they also learned from their Indian neighbors to use native foods like corn, squash, and pine nuts, and to make clothing such as moccasins. On the first page there, it says Spanish traditions were important to New Mexicans. The settlers made beautiful religious paintings and statues for their churches and homes. On special occasions, they enjoyed lively dances called fandangos. Pueblo Indians had lived in New Mexico for centuries before the settlers arrived. Over the years, the Indians and the settlers slowly learned to live as neighbors. By the time Josefina was a girl, the settlers and the Pueblo Indians often fought together against enemy tribes, such as the Comanche, Apache, Navajo, and Ute. These Indians sometimes traveled to northern New Mexico to raid homes and farms. New Mexican settlers never forgot the danger of Indian attacks, and women and children were not allowed to go far from home alone. At the bottom of the page there is a picture of the Pueblo Indians' homes. Pueblo Indians lived in adobe villages in Josefina's time. Some Pueblos still live in them today. And I've always thought that those were such interesting buildings. I taught this to my second graders and my fourth graders over the years. They don't have doors on the bottom ground. You can see in the picture there that they have really long ladders. Because there were so many dangerous enemies in this area, they didn't have doors on the ground so that the enemies couldn't get in easily. They would climb up ladders to get into the doors and the holes in the roof in their homes. And then if enemies came, they would pull up the ladders so that enemies couldn't get in. At the very top of the page, it says Pueblo Indians in New Mexico wore leather moccasins. The settlers soon began to wear these sturdy, comfortable shoes too. And that's what Josefina's wearing. Don't know if you noticed at all, but her little shoes are moccasins. And they would have learned that from their Pueblo Indian neighbors. Now hers have been restrung. The original strings from American Girl are gone. But the moccasins are still the same, original to her. Families like Josefina's, who lived outside of villages or towns, built their homes like small fortresses. The high outside walls had only one or two entrances with heavy gates that could be bolted shut. These homes often had a lookout tower where people could watch for danger. In case of attack, people and animals were gathered inside the walls and the huge gates were locked tight. People living in New Mexico needed supplies from Mexico. The Camino Real, or Royal Road, was the trail that connected Santa Fe with Mexican towns and cities hundreds of miles south. Most New Mexican traders went as far as the city of Chihuahua, but a few like Abuelito traveled all the way to Mexico City. And you can see on the map there on the page, Santa Fe, all the way down to Chihuahua, which is in Mexico, all the way down to Mexico City. And you might recognize the name Chihuahua. That is the place where the breed of dog Chihuahua came from. An interesting thing that is in the picture there at the top of the page is the courtyard. Houses on New Mexican ranchos were usually built around an open courtyard. Women and girls did much of their work in the courtyard. And that courtyard looks like it has a well, which would have been really useful if they ever came under attack from enemies and had to blockade in their rancho. They would have had water in this particular courtyard. I don't think I saw that ever in Josefina's rancho. Continuing on, in Mexico City, They brought New Mexican goods such as wool blankets, animal hides, and pine nuts to trade. In return, they received needed items like iron tools and luxuries like chocolate. They also received goods from other countries, such as Chinese silks, spices, and dishes, and European lace, fabrics, and fine jewelry. So at the top says New Mexicans wove warm wool blankets like these to use in their homes and to trade for fine things from Mexico, which you know all about the weaving from our last video. And at the bottom, goods from Europe and Asia came to Mexico on great sailing ships. Traders carried luxuries like imported dishes, fine jewelry and hair combs, and painted trunks to New Mexico on the Camino Real. A caravan like Abuelito's took 4 or 5 months to travel from Santa Fe to New Mexico. There were deserts, canyons, mountains, and rivers to cross, and there was always the danger of attack. For more than 200 years, the Camino Real was New Mexico's only link to the rest of the world. Then in 1821, American traders began leading wagon trains from the state of Missouri to New Mexico. They made an important new trade route, which became known as the Santa Fe Trail. For the first time, people and goods from the United States began flowing into New Mexico. At the top it says, mule trains like this one carried goods on the Camino Real. This engraving shows men loading up their pack mules to begin another day on the trail. And at the bottom, soldiers traveled with trading caravans on the Camino Real. They helped protect the caravans from danger. So it just mentioned the Santa Fe Trail. Let's go back to our map here. So it says in 1821, they started leading caravans or wagon trains from Missouri. So here's Missouri, all the way to Santa Fe to trade. That was called the Santa Fe Trail. And so that started to bring things from the northern or the eastern part of the United States, all the goods that they had here could come over to Missouri and then from there be taken to Santa Fe and to the New Mexico area. So it opened up a lot of new items, goods, things that could be traded. And it started to influence America being important to New Mexico. Only 25 years later, in 1846, the United States declared war on Mexico. When the war ended in 1848, America had claimed most of the land that is now the southwestern United States, including California, Nevada, Utah, much of Colorado, and almost all of Arizona and New Mexico. Although Josefina would never have imagined it when she was 9 years old, the time that our story takes place, she would one day be an American. And the cultures and traditions of New Mexican settlers and their Pueblo neighbors would become part of America too. Under the picture it says, you can see what life was like in Josefina's time by visiting living museums in northern New Mexico. El Rancho de las Golondrinas near Santa Fe and La Hacienda de los Martínez in Taos are both restored homes of New Mexican settlers. Above, guides at Las Golondrinas show how settlers preserved chili peppers for the winter. And I mentioned in, I think, our first chapter of Josefina, the Rancho de las Golondrinas, and their website link will be in my website on my channel. Look for it there if you want to find out more about that interesting rancho. So let me show you all of the states that it just mentioned that once America won the war against Mexico, all of these states became part of the United States. So California, Nevada, Utah, much of Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, all became part of the United States. Now, Texas had at one time belonged to Mexico too, but Texas fought a war against Mexico a little bit earlier, and so they had already gained their independence from Mexico. So they were their own country at the time the United States fought against Mexico and got all of this territory. Texas was its own country, and it decided to become part of the United States, and that's why Texas is part of the United States today. And so that wraps up Meet Josefina. I loved this story. I loved learning all of the interesting things about her life and her time period. And I like learning about the Pueblo Indians. In some of her other stories, you'll learn more about the Pueblo Indians. We learned a little bit about the Navajo with the weaving as well. So the next American Girl story that I plan on reading to you is a Native American girl, Kaya. So we'll be talking about her life and how different her life was. She lived much earlier even than Josefina did. So in a few weeks, I will start to upload those videos. Meet Kaya. Thanks so much for joining me and Josefina.